The English Channel has long been known as one of the most heavily traversed waterways in the world, but in 1940, it became something far more dangerous, an invisible frontier where aircraft vanished with terrifying frequency. As Britain stood alone following the fall of France, RAF Coastal Command was thrust into a role it had never been fully prepared for, protecting the channel from German invasion, hunting U-boats, and providing reconnaissance during the most chaotic months of the war. It was during this frantic early period that several RAF crews, flying routine patrols, disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only incomplete logbooks and unanswered questions. The story begins in the summer of 1940, a season etched into British memory as the crucible of the Battle of Britain. While Fighter Command battled the Luftwaffe above the fields of southern England, another war unfolded across the waters below. Coastal Command, often overshadowed in wartime accounts, was stretched thin and relied heavily on aging aircraft and incomplete intelligence. Their task was monumental: locate enemy convoys, track U-boats, and secure vital supply routes between Britain and its remaining allies. The Bristol Blenheim crews of units like No. 236 Squadron found themselves flying low, often below cloud cover and within range of German flak batteries stationed along the French coast. The pressure on these aircrews was immense. Aircraft frequently went out under-equipped, with minimal radar coverage and patchy radio reliability. One crewman from 236 Squadron wrote in his diary, "We fly blind more often than we fly ready. You don't see what kills you over the channel, you only hear it." That sentiment was not an exaggeration. Luftwaffe patrols aggressively hunted RAF reconnaissance aircraft, knowing their reports could compromise convoy movements or U-boat deployments. The channel was narrow, providing little room for evasive maneuvers. What began as a seemingly simple patrol could rapidly shift into a fight for survival. The loss records from 1940 reflect this. Many vanishings occurred not during daring bombing raids or intense fighter battles, but on seemingly routine patrols where no one expected danger. Aircraft simply failed to return. Sometimes a garbled radio message hinted at trouble, other times, silence was the only clue. For the families of the missing, this uncertainty was agonizing. Without wreckage, without bodies, without a clear final location, many cases remained officially listed as presumed lost, a sterile phrase that masked the terror of the crew's final moments. Historical insight suggests several overlapping causes for these disappearances. German fighter units, particularly those based at Cherbourg, Cannes, and Brest, frequently conducted sweeps across the Channel's shipping lanes. Their reports were not always meticulously logged, especially during the height of the Battle of Britain, leaving gaps in the Luftwaffe's own archives. Weather also played a devastating role. Sudden fog banks, violent squalls, and unpredictable winds often pushed aircraft off course or forced them dangerously low over the sea, where a single mechanical failure could be fatal. Coastal Command's own internal reports from the period reveal a troubling pattern. Crews were flying longer hours, in older aircraft, with limited maintenance cycles. A briefing note from July 1940 warned, "Loss rates are rising. We are asking too much of machines and men alike." And indeed, it was this combination, enemy action, mechanical strain, and unforgiving weather, that created a perfect storm responsible for many of the Channel's wartime mysteries. Yet even with these explanations, several cases still stand out for their utter lack of clues. Patrol routes were tracked. Radio logs were preserved. But the sea kept its secrets. Search and rescue operations, launched as soon as aircraft failed to return, often found nothing more than oil slicks or floating debris too generic to identify. For commanders reviewing these losses, the frustration was palpable. How could so many aircraft vanish in a region so heavily watched, flown over, and fought over? Modern historians continue to investigate the period using declassified reports and new maritime surveys, but many of the Channel's wartime crash sites remain undiscovered. As one historian noted, the seabed is a graveyard of forgotten missions. The war doesn't end where the documents stop. This unsettling truth forms the backdrop for the stories that follow, stories of 5 RAF crews whose disappearances have never been fully explained. In these cases, the channel's reputation as both strategic lifeline and silent grave becomes painfully clear. And as we move into the first disappearance, the loss of the Blenheim from No. 236 Squadron, we begin to uncover patterns that raise more questions than they answer. The war created many heroes, many victories, but also many mysteries. And some of the most haunting began with a simple entry in an operations log: failed to return. By mid-August 1940, the Battle of Britain was raging overhead, but another struggle, quieter, less celebrated, was taking place just miles offshore. It was on the morning of August 12th that a Bristol Blenheim Mk4 from RAF No. 236 Squadron began what should have been a standard low-altitude reconnaissance patrol over the English Channel. The mission log, written in the clipped handwriting of the squadron duty officer, recorded nothing unusual. Aircraft N-3601. Crew: Sergeant Thomas Riley, pilot; Sergeant Alan Whitford, observer; AC-1 Bernard Hale, wireless op. Task: channel sweep, Cherbourg sector. Departed 0640 hours. No one knew these would be the last details ever documented about the crew. The day began with heavy haze drifting in from the Atlantic, typical summer weather but dangerous for low-flying aircraft. The Blenheim crews of 236 Squadron were accustomed to hugging the waves, flying just high enough to avoid spray, while scanning for enemy convoys and patrolling Luftwaffe movements along the occupied French coastline. It was grueling work, leaving the crew exposed to both German fighters and ship-based anti-aircraft fire. Adding to the tension, Blenheims were already considered outdated by 1940 standards, underarmed, underarmored, and slower than the Messerschmitt Bf 109s that patrolled the coast. That morning, Riley's aircraft was one of two dispatched to cover the same sector. The second Blenheim returned at 0930 hours with no sightings reported. Riley's crew did not. Their last recorded communication came just after 0810 hours, when Sergeant Whitford transmitted a brief report of enemy aircraft approaching. The message was cut off mid-sentence. Ground control attempted to re-establish contact for nearly 40 minutes before officially classifying the aircraft as missing. No mayday was received. No further signals followed. For the men of 236 Squadron, such losses were not entirely unfamiliar, but this one hit harder. Riley was experienced, 2 years with the squadron, and known for his calm under pressure. Whitford, only 21, had a reputation for meticulous navigation. Hale, the youngest of the crew, was a recent addition, still carrying the optimism of a man new to operational flying. Their disappearance raised immediate questions that commanders struggled to answer. Early theories focused on Luftwaffe interception. German fighter units operated aggressively across the Channel, especially around Cherbourg. It was plausible that Riley's Blenheim had been surprised by a faster fighter patrol. Yet no German pilot claimed a Blenheim on that date in that sector. The absence of a claim was not definitive. Records from the period are incomplete, but it puzzled later analysts who expected at least partial documentation if an engagement had occurred. Another theory pointed to mechanical failure. The Blenheim's engines, twin Bristol Mercuries, were notoriously prone to overheating during low-level maneuvers. Losing one engine at low altitude could be catastrophic, leaving the aircraft unable to maintain height long enough for the crew to ditch safely. But if a mechanical failure occurred, why had there been no distress call? Why no report of engine trouble before the final, abrupt message? A third possibility emerged from accounts of ships positioned along the British coast. A Royal Navy vessel stationed off Portland later reported hearing distant gunfire around the time of the Blenheim's disappearance, brief bursts, followed by silence. The crew could not determine the direction, and no aircraft was spotted. Whether those gunshots were connected remains unknown, but the timing was close enough to enter the post-mission analysis. One of the most compelling pieces of context comes from an entry in the squadron diary written 2 days after the loss. Channel patrols remain hazardous, beyond expectation. Low turbulence, fog patches, scattered enemy fighters. Crews express frustration at lack of radar coverage. In 1940, most coastal command aircraft still relied on visual spotting. A sudden fog bank or heavy sea haze could blind a crew long enough to obscure both enemy fighters and coastal artillery. Many aircraft disappeared this way, flying inadvertently into German-controlled airspace or drifting too close to fortified positions before being shot down. Despite an extensive search effort, no wreckage from Riley's Blenheim was ever recovered. Aircraft usually left some trace, an oil slick, a floating dinghy, a piece of fuselage, but the channel can swallow evidence quickly. Strong tides and deep trenches often concealed crash sites within hours. The absence of debris suggested either an immediate catastrophic breakup upon impact or a ditching far from the estimated patrol route. For the families, the disappearance created a lasting void. Sergeant Whitford's mother wrote in a letter preserved by the squadron archives, "If only we knew what happened. A body, a sign, anything." Her plea captures the emotional toll such losses inflicted on home-front communities, where uncertainty was often more painful than confirmation of death. Modern historians, analyzing flight paths and radar gaps, still debate the likely cause. Some suggest an ambush by German fighters flying below cloud cover. Others argue for sudden engine failure leading to a fatal impact. None can say for certain. And this uncertainty, this blank space in the historical record, sets the tone for the stories that follow. For Riley's crew was only the first among several whose final minutes remain concealed beneath the channel's shifting waters, leading us into the next disappearance, the vanishing of an RAF Hudson in 1941. By the spring of 1941, the air war over the channel had changed shape. Britain was no longer fighting for survival alone. Instead, it was learning how to wage a long, grinding campaign against the German U-boat threat strangling its Atlantic lifelines. In this effort, RAF Coastal Command's Lockheed Hudsons became vital tools, fast, reliable patrol aircraft capable of long-range sweeps far beyond the reach of earlier machines. Yet even these sturdier aircraft were not immune to the channel's dangers. On a gray morning in April 1941, one Hudson from No. 206 Squadron lifted off from RAF Bircham Newton for an anti-submarine patrol southeast of the Isle of Wight and simply disappeared. The aircraft, believed to be Hudson 3T-9463, carried a three-man crew, Flying Officer Robert Ellison as pilot, Pilot Officer James Harwood as navigator, and Sergeant Martin Fletcher as wireless operator and air gunner. The mission plan was straightforward: sweep a convoy route that had seen increased U-boat presence, coordinate with Royal Navy escort vessels, and report any suspicious activity. The Hudson departed at 0615 hours in weather described as low cloud, intermittent showers, visibility fair. Nothing in the initial briefing hinted at danger beyond the usual operational risks. From the outset, Ellison's crew faced a demanding environment. The spring weather over the channel is notoriously unpredictable, shifting from clear skies to blinding rain squalls within minutes. Hudson crews often flew long, monotonous hours punctuated by brief moments of danger, an indistinct silhouette on the water, a shadow in a cloud bank, or the sudden crack of anti-aircraft fire from a surfaced U-boat. For Harwood, meticulous navigation was essential. Straying too far from the planned route could leave the aircraft isolated or vulnerable to enemy fighters. The last confirmed radio message from T-9463 came at 0742 hours. Fletcher transmitted a brief status update. No sightings. Continuing sector sweep. It was routine, calm, and gave no indication of trouble. But sometime in the next 30 minutes, witnesses aboard a nearby merchant convoy reported hearing distant gunfire, 3 short bursts, then silence. No aircraft was visible through the haze. The convoy escort logged the sound but did not break formation. The report would only later be connected to the missing Hudson. What complicates the historical record is the lack of German claims for that area and date. Luftwaffe units operating from northern France kept detailed tallies, especially when downing Allied patrol aircraft. Yet on this day, no record of a Hudson interception appears. This discrepancy has led historians to explore alternate scenarios, each with its own set of mysteries. One possibility is that Ellison's crew located a surface U-boat and attempted to attack. U-boats were equipped with increasingly effective anti-aircraft defenses by 1941, including 20mm cannons capable of shredding a low-flying aircraft. There are documented cases where RAF aircraft were shot down before they could release depth charges, sometimes disappearing so quickly that no Allied vessel ever witnessed the engagement. However, German U-boat war diaries, meticulously kept, show no confirmed aircraft engagement matching the Hudson's patrol area. Another theory points to weather as the decisive factor. Meteorological records from that morning indicate sudden formations of low-slung fog banks and strong crosswinds near the Isle of Wight. A Hudson flying at low altitude could easily become disoriented or lose lift in such conditions. A single miscalculation or momentary spatial disorientation could have sent the aircraft plunging into the sea. Yet again, this raises the question, why no distress call? A pilot of Ellison's experience would likely have attempted to transmit a warning unless the event was sudden and catastrophic. Mechanical failure is also considered. The Hudson, while dependable, was not immune to structural issues. Fuel system leaks, engine malfunctions, and electrical faults were recurring problems in early variants. A simultaneous engine failure, though extremely rare, could have been fatal if the aircraft was flying low. But investigators found no earlier maintenance issues severe enough to support this theory. A final, more unusual possibility involves misidentification during wartime chaos. Several Allied convoys operated in overlapping patrol zones, and their escorts occasionally fired on unidentified aircraft. While friendly fire incidents were recorded during this period, none officially matched the date or location of the Hudson's disappearance. Still, the lack of wreckage leaves room for speculation. A revealing clue emerged months later in the squadron's internal review. A note written by Wing Commander Lionel Fraser reads, "We cannot dismiss the convoy report. Gunfire heard, no visual confirmation. Radar silence from T-9463. Consider possibility of engagement not logged by enemy." His comment hints at a scenario where the Hudson encountered a threat that left no official trace, either due to incomplete record-keeping or the rapid, chaotic nature of the event. For the families of Ellison, Harwood, and Fletcher, the absence of answers became its own burden. Without wreckage, without bodies, without an enemy claim or a definitive scenario, their story joined the growing list of wartime disappearances that remained unresolved. Harwood's brother later wrote to the Air Ministry, asking, "If not shot down, then where did they go?" The ministry could only reply with the standard phrase, "Missing, presumed killed." Modern maritime surveys of the Channel have yet to locate a wreck matching the missing Hudson. The seabed in that region is uneven and deep, a labyrinth of sand plains and underwater ridges. In such terrain, even large aircraft can remain hidden indefinitely. Thus, the disappearance of T-9463 stands as one of the Channel's most perplexing losses, an aircraft seen by no one, attacked by no one, yet gone without a trace. And as attention shifts to the next case, the nighttime vanishing of a Wellington bomber in 1942, the mystery only deepens. By late 1942, the war in the Atlantic had entered a dangerous new phase. Germany's U-boats were operating farther east, slipping into British coastal waters under cover of darkness. To counter this, RAF Coastal Command deployed one of its most important nighttime assets, the Vickers Wellington GR Mk8, equipped with the revolutionary ASV Mk2 radar, technology that promised to turn the tide of the nocturnal U-boat hunt. But even with improved tools, these missions were perilous. On the night of October 27, 1942, a Wellington from No. 172 Squadron took off from RAF Chivener, reported radar contact with a suspected U-boat, and vanished before completing its attack run. The aircraft, believed to be Wellington HX-448, carried a six-man crew under the command of Flight Lieutenant Charles Westcott, an experienced pilot with over 600 hours of operational flying. With him were Navigator Flying Officer Reginald Marsh, Wireless Operator Sergeant Peter Haynes, Radar Operator Sergeant Owen Mercer, and Gunner Sergeants William Drew and Harry Collins. They departed at 20:15 hours into a moonless sky, joining a growing roster of night patrols tasked with blocking U-boat access to the Western Channel approaches. Night operations demanded a different kind of courage. Crews flew not by sight but by instrument, relying on radar screens, altimeters, and the faint glow of cockpit lamps. The channel at night was a vast black void. Its surface reflected nothing, giving pilots no sense of height or horizon. As Westcott's Wellington pushed into the darkness, the crew settled into the tense rhythm of a night patrol, scanning radar sweeps, listening for distant German transmissions, and watching for the telltale silhouette of a surface submarine. At 22:03 hours, the crew made their first and only notable transmission. Mercer, the radar operator, reported a strong contact. Suspected surface vessel. Bearing 187. Closing. This suggested a U-boat traveling on the surface to recharge its batteries, a vulnerable moment that Coastal Command patrols sought to exploit. The aircraft descended to attack height, preparing to release depth charges. Moments later, the transmission cut abruptly. No mayday. No follow-up. Just silence. The immediate assumption at Chivener was that the Wellington had simply dropped below radio range. But as minutes became hours and other aircraft failed to confirm a sighting, concern deepened. Dawn brought no sign of the missing bomber. Radar stations along the coast logged nothing. The Royal Navy reported no nighttime engagements in the area. It was as though the Wellington had stepped off the face of the earth. A detailed inquiry began the next morning. The initial theory focused on anti-aircraft fire from a surfaced U-boat. By late 1942, German submarines routinely carried flak-Vierling quadruple 20mm cannons, capable of firing over 800 rounds per minute. Several Coastal Command aircraft had already been shot down during surprise night attacks on U-boats. But when intelligence officers examined German naval war diaries, no U-boat reported an air engagement matching the time and location of Westcott's disappearance. Another possibility was mechanical failure. Wellington bombers had strong reputations, but their geodetic framework was vulnerable to sudden structural stress, particularly in low-altitude maneuvers. An engine stall during the final approach could have sent the aircraft plunging into the sea before anyone could react. Yet the timing of the radio cut, right after a radar contact report, suggested something more violent and immediate. Weather also entered the investigation. Meteorological reports indicate intermittent squalls and shifting cloud banks over the Western Channel that night. Low-level turbulence could have disrupted the aircraft's descent. But again, even in a weather-induced crash, some floating debris typically appeared along coastal drift zones. None did. The most intriguing clue emerged weeks later when an RAF analysis team reviewed radar logs from the night of the disappearance. A faint, short-lived blip had appeared near the Wellington's last known location, another aircraft flying at low altitude, moving opposite the Wellington's course. No Allied aircraft were scheduled in that sector at that time. The possibility of a Luftwaffe intruder was raised. German night fighter units occasionally conducted deep channel patrols, though records seldom detail such operations. If a night fighter ambushed the Wellington during its descent, the crew may never have seen it coming. Still, this theory remains speculative. Luftwaffe documentation from late 1942 leaves a gap where such a mission might have been recorded, but no surviving record confirms it. Historians examining the case note that while German night fighters seldom operated over the Western Channel, special missions were not unheard of, particularly when U-boats signaled they were being shadowed by radar-equipped aircraft. What remains most haunting about HX-448's disappearance is the complete lack of wreckage. The Wellington was a large, durable aircraft. Even a catastrophic impact usually produced identifiable debris. Search aircraft combed the area for 2 days. Nothing surfaced, not a dinghy, not an oil slick, not a single piece of fabric from the Wellington's distinctive geodetic fuselage. In a report filed weeks later, Wing Commander Holt summarized the mystery with the stark line, "Cause of loss unknown. Evidence insufficient. Presumed lost on operations." It was a phrase that appeared far too often in Coastal Command records. For the families of the crew, the absence of answers weighed heavily. Westcott's wife wrote to the squadron months later, stating simply, If he died fighting, I want to know. If he died in the dark, I want to know that too. She never received a definitive reply. Today, maritime surveys continue to map the Channel floor, but the Wellington has never been located. Its disappearance remains one of No. 172 Squadron's most enduring mysteries, an aircraft seen by no one, tracked for a moment, then gone forever into the night. With this unresolved loss, we now turn to another case, one involving a Beaufighter crew in 1943, whose final transmission hinted at pursuit, interception, and an even deeper mystery over the Western Channel. By the spring of 1943, RAF Coastal Command was shifting from a defensive posture to an increasingly aggressive one. New aircraft, improved radar, and refined intercept tactics were finally beginning to challenge the grip of the Luftwaffe along the Channel. Among the most formidable tools in Britain's arsenal was the Bristol Beaufighter, fast, heavily armed, and feared by German crews for its devastating firepower. Yet even this rugged aircraft was not invulnerable. On March 14, 1943, a Beaufighter from No. 248 Squadron took off from RAF Predanach in Cornwall to escort returning bomber formations over the Western Channel. The mission should have been straightforward. Instead, it culminated in one of the squadron's most perplexing disappearances. The aircraft, likely Beaufighter 6EL-293, was flown by Flight Sergeant Michael Mick Ainsworth, with Sergeant David Rowe serving as navigator and radar operator. Both were seasoned airmen. Ainsworth had built a reputation as a cool-headed pilot, skilled in low-level interception, while Rowe's navigation skills had earned commendations from squadron leadership. Their role that afternoon was to provide cover for a group of RAF liberators returning from an anti-submarine operation near the Bay of Biscay, a region infamous for fast-moving German fighter sweeps. Escort missions required constant vigilance. Liberators were slow and vulnerable, and German FW-190s frequently surged north from Brittany, attempting to intercept lone or straggling bombers. Beaufighter crews like Ainsworth and Rowe positioned themselves slightly ahead of the formation, using onboard radar to scan for incoming threats. Clouds hung low that afternoon, forming moving walls of gray that could conceal both friend and foe. The channel below was rough, wind-scored, and unforgiving. At 15:42 hours, Ainsworth's Beaufighter checked in with control, escort proceeding normally. Nothing in the transmission suggested distress. But 20 minutes later, as the liberators neared the midpoint of their return route, things changed. Ainsworth transmitted a second message, this time terse and urgent. Pursuing bandit. Low cloud. Will advise. Those would be the last recorded words from the aircraft. Moments after the transmission, another escorting crew flying several miles to the south reported seeing a brief flash of cannon fire inside a dense cloud layer. They couldn't identify the aircraft involved. Its silhouette was swallowed almost immediately by the mist. No one could confirm whether it was Ainsworth's Beaufighter or a German fighter. When the liberators landed later that afternoon, control officers quickly realized that EL-293 was missing. Squadron intelligence initially assumed a German interception. Luftwaffe units, particularly Jagdgeschwader 2 and Jagdgeschwader 26, often conducted tip-and-run sorties across the Western Channel, diving in and out of coastal clouds to ambush RAF patrols. But when British analysts combed through subsequent German records, they found no fighter claims matching the time or location of the disappearance. It wasn't unusual for some engagements to go unrecorded, but the absence of any mention at all raised doubts. Other theories emerged. The first was weather. The cloud deck that afternoon was notoriously unstable, dense fog banks interspersed with pockets of violent turbulence. A Beaufighter diving into cloud at high speed could easily lose orientation. If Ainsworth attempted to pursue a radar contact into the cloud layer, he may have misjudged his altitude or angle of descent. The Beaufighter's heavy nose and twin engines could exacerbate such disorientation, sending the aircraft spiraling toward the sea before either crewman had a chance to radio a distress call. Another possibility was mechanical failure. Despite their strength, Beaufighters had a history of sudden engine issues, particularly with their Hercules 7 radials under heavy throttle. A single engine failure during an aggressive maneuver could have tipped the aircraft into an unrecoverable stall. Yet the timing, immediately following a message about pursuing an enemy, suggests circumstances more dramatic than simple mechanical trouble. Then there is the most intriguing theory, that the crew followed a German aircraft into cloud cover and were unwittingly drawn off course. Luftwaffe pilots were known to use the cloud layer to break contact or lure Allied aircraft into disorienting conditions. If Ainsworth pushed deeper into the fog than expected, he may have become separated from both the bombers and his radar range, leaving him isolated in one of the most dangerous flying environments imaginable. A small piece of supporting evidence surfaced months after the incident when a Royal Navy vessel operating off Land's End reported finding a section of unidentified aircraft fabric, olive-colored, with traces of fire damage. It was too small and degraded to confirm its origin, but the location roughly matched where prevailing currents would have carried debris from a crash. The find, however, was inconclusive. No bodies were recovered. No confirmed wreckage was found. The sea returned no answers. A stark entry in No. 248 Squadron's operations record book summarized the loss. Failed to return. Last message indicated pursuit of enemy aircraft. No further contact. For the squadron, which prided itself on aggressive tactics, the disappearance carried an emotional weight. The fact that the Beaufighter was built for survival, thick armor, formidable firepower, made its vanishing feel even more unsettling. In recent years, maritime archaeologists have mapped several new wrecks in the Western Channel, but none match the dimensions or construction of a Beaufighter. For now, the aircraft remains one of the region's many wartime ghosts, its final moments obscured by cloud, confusion, and the chaos of a sky where predators hunted each other at the edge of visibility. And as the Channel continued to swallow aircraft in the final years of the war, one more disappearance would add to the growing list of unanswered wartime enigmas, another crew, another mission, and another set of questions left drifting on the tides. By 1944, the tide of war had turned decisively in the Allies' favor. D-Day was on the horizon, U-boat losses were mounting, and the Luftwaffe was weaker than ever. Yet even as Allied dominance grew, the English Channel remained a perilous expanse, an unpredictable arena where weather, machinery, and sudden enemy action could still erase entire aircrews without warning. In these final years of the conflict, the number of RAF aircraft lost without trace had fallen, but not disappeared entirely. And among the last of these wartime mysteries was the vanishing of an RAF crew whose mission should have been routine, almost uneventful, yet ended in complete silence. On May 2, 1944, a consolidated Liberator GRV from RAF Coastal Command's No. 224 Squadron took off from RAF St. Eval for an extended anti-submarine patrol. The Liberator, coded H. Hannah, was flown by Flight Lieutenant Arthur Kinsley, an experienced American-born pilot serving with the RAF since 1941. With him were Navigator Flying Officer Bernard Locke, Wireless Operator Sergeant Kenneth Miles, Radar Operator Sergeant Ralph Sutton, and Gunners Sergeants Douglas Fry and Edmund Carter. Their task: sweep the Central Channel for signs of U-boat traffic believed to be repositioning in anticipation of Allied landings in France. The Liberator was a powerful, long-range aircraft, and by 1944 it had become one of Coastal Command's most reliable tools for hunting submarines. It carried advanced ASV radar, Lee lights for nighttime illumination, and a mix of depth charges and rockets. But despite its capabilities, the Channel's conditions could still transform any patrol into a life-threatening ordeal. That morning, the weather briefing noted scattered cumulonimbus, variable winds, sea state rough, not ideal, but far from prohibitive. Kinsley acknowledged the report, conducted pre-flight checks, and lifted off into the rising sun. For the first several hours, the flight proceeded normally. At 9:18 hours, the crew reported a radar contact that resolved into a false return, likely a wave anomaly or drifting debris. At 10:41 hours, a second contact was logged, this time a confirmed Allied trawler. But at 11:07 hours, something unusual occurred. Sutton, the radar operator, reported a faint surface contact moving slowly against the prevailing currents, potentially a U-boat running at minimal power. The Liberator altered course to investigate. The crew never transmitted what they saw next. Their final radio message, logged at 11:15, was brief, almost unnervingly calm. Investigating contact. Will report shortly. No distress. No warning. Nothing to suggest danger. Minutes later, a nearby Royal Navy destroyer escort, HMS Aylmer, reported hearing a distant thud, followed by a muted rumbling. At the time, the sound was attributed to depth charges deployed during training drills. Only after the Liberator failed to return did the destroyer's captain send a message to Coastal Command describing the noise. Its timing aligned almost exactly with the aircraft's final reported position. The inquiry that followed explored several possible explanations. Enemy action was considered first. By early 1944, German U-boats were still active in the Channel, albeit in smaller numbers. Some carried enhanced anti-aircraft defenses capable of firing bursts that could cripple a low-flying patrol aircraft. However, German naval records for that period list no engagement with an Allied aircraft in the region on that date. If Kinsley's crew encountered a U-boat, it left no claim and no surviving enemy testimony. A more complex scenario involved a malfunction during attack formation. Liberators often descended rapidly when preparing a depth charge run, flying low and fast to minimize exposure. A sudden downdraft or misjudgment of altitude could send the aircraft into the waves with catastrophic speed. The thud heard by HMS Aylmer may have been the sound of an impact. Yet this theory also raises questions. Why no attempt at a mayday? How could a seasoned pilot like Kinsley miscalculate so drastically unless visibility had dropped to zero or the radar contact forced an unexpected maneuver? Weather then entered the discussion. Meteorological logs show that around 11:10 hours, a small squall line passed through the area. These brief, intense weather fronts could form and dissipate rapidly. If the Liberator descended into one while lining up an approach on the radar contact, the sudden turbulence may have overwhelmed the crew. Still, such an event typically leaves floating debris. None was found. Mechanical failure was also considered. The Liberator's 4 Pratt & Whitney engines, though reliable, were not immune to sudden issues. A fuel system malfunction or structural stress event could have occurred at low altitude, leaving no time to radio a warning. But again, without wreckage, this remains speculation. The most haunting theory suggests that the radar contact itself was the beginning of a fatal chain reaction. Some historians propose that the signal detected by Sutton may not have been a submarine or surface vessel at all, but a phantom return caused by atmospheric interference, a mirage on the radar screen. If the crew believed they were pursuing a genuine target, they may have descended into a dangerous weather cell or lost situational awareness. In the end, none of the theories could be confirmed. No oil slick was ever reported. No life rafts or fragments were recovered. The Liberator and its 7-man crew simply vanished. For No. 224 Squadron, the loss was deeply felt. These were experienced airmen, trusted veterans preparing for what they knew would be the most pivotal phase of the war. Their disappearance in the final months before D-Day served as a chilling reminder that even late in the conflict, with Allied superiority at its peak, the Channel remained an unpredictable and deadly battleground. Today, sonar scans continue to uncover forgotten wrecks on the seabed. Some match known wartime losses. Many remain anonymous, but none, so far, have been identified as Kinsley's Liberator. And so the story of the 5 forgotten RAF crews, lost over one of the most heavily monitored waterways of World War II, remains incomplete. Their sacrifices helped secure victory, but their final moments are still hidden beneath the shifting currents of the Channel, a silent chapter in a war full of unanswered questions.